Welcome back to the Living Process. And this time I have two guests, Nikos Kypriotakis and Judy Moore, um, both very well known in the focusing world. Nikos, especially in Europe and in Greece, and Judy in the UK and across Europe. And both of them also well known because of their two volumes of Senses of Focusing, two incredibly rich books um, that explore all sorts of different areas of focusing from different perspectives. And in this episode, one of the things we speak about is a little bit about the motivation behind these books, but also their kind of more general interaction in the worlds of psychotherapy and focusing and philosophy, and how they are interacting with people from the person-centered world, especially in Judy's case, and for Nikos with Dozan's analysis, phenomenology, existential therapy, Gestalt, and kind of how a focusing oriented perspective is received and sometimes misunderstood by these other traditions, and maybe what we need to think about doing better in order to be able to communicate to some of our colleagues in those other orientations. It's a fascinating discussion from my point of view, and we only sort of touch on topics that are each very rich and deep and require a whole conference of their own. But it's a beginning. So thank you very much for tuning in and welcome to this conversation with Nikos and Judy. Okay, welcome back to the Living Process. And this time I have two guests, Judy and Nikos, um, well known at least partly because of these two enormous books that they've produced, absolute gold mines of focusing, comments on focusing practices, focusing practices. But before we get into, I guess, a new version of the book that is being planned, um, maybe I could start the way I normally start by asking both of you how you got into focusing, what attracted you to this practice, and maybe starting with Judy.
Okay, yeah. Um, I mean, as you probably know, my background is person-centered rather than focusing.
Yeah.
And so I trained in the person-centered approach in the late 1980s, and we learnt a little bit about focusing as a taught procedure, but we were never taught, and for a long time I never understood how how the experiential response relates to person-centered therapy. So it was always separate. So I was trained in what's known as classical person-centeredness. And I then I became a trainer on a person-centered training course. And throughout the 1990s, I was a trainer at UEA. And I actually used to do the one focusing session that we had on a 1 year course. And so I would go through the 6 steps. People would be astonished at how effective it was. And sometimes I would be astonished at how effective it was. And that was the end of it. And it didn't feature in the training at all. So it was a very split off thing.
Mm.
And then I suppose it was in the late 1990s, Campbell Purton, my colleague, began to explore focusing. And he, for a long time, he was trying to persuade me to engage with it in some way. But because I was so classical, I had the attitude that people still have in the person-centered world today, that focusing is a technique and we shouldn't touch it. It was nothing to do with us. So it took a lot of persuasion. Anyway, eventually I agreed to go with Campbell to a conference in Durham where Mary Gendlin was addressing a very, very radical classical person-centered group, the British Association for the Person-Centered Approach. And when she was actually meant to be in, she was in dialogue with a woman called Marge Whitty. And basically what Mary did in her presentation was she just made it clear that, focusing oriented therapy, focusing within an interaction is no different from what we were doing in person-centered therapy. So I could really understand really, it was literally for the first time that there didn't need to be this division. Anyway, by this time, I'd actually stopped being a person-centered trainer, but I then began to work with Campbell to bring focusing into our university. And so I started doing focusing trainings, different kinds of focusing trainings. And I trained with, I went down to London, I trained with Peter Afford, Mary Maguire and Janet Klein came to England and I trained with them. And then, of course, with Kevin McEvenew. And I think I met you on one of those trainings. So, I mean, Kevin was a major influence on my understanding of focusing. But in terms of the theory, the key thing for me was when I read Gendlin's 1964 theory, and that explained, the experiential response. It was the element that was always missing for me in the classical person-centered training. And so, yeah, I mean, that was my route into focusing. So it's been a rather strange journey. I mean, I didn't discover focusing in a wonderful revelatory way, but I slowly got to know it and I slowly got to appreciate its therapeutic, the relevance of the experiential response. I mean, that's been the big deal for me. So I can't I can't isolate my knowledge of focusing from that general background.
Interesting. Great. I mean, you said a lot of things that I hope we'll come back to.
Mhm,
Yeah, really interesting journey into focusing through the person-centered world, it sounds like.
mhm,
And then maybe, uh, well, we'll see where that goes to next.
mhm.
Um, but Nikos, I'm curious, how did you end up being introduced to focusing and its applications?
Okay, what can I say? Please correct me if I use the English language badly. My introduction to focusing was very experiential and very intense, I would say. I was fortunate enough to have, in a very difficult situation in my life, which had to do with a horrible death of a friend of mine,
Hmm.
really by cancer. So it was a difficult, very difficult situation for me. And my therapist at that time, I lost the ground. I lost my ground then. And in a very important session, I was able to, let's say, symbolize what was happening to me, but in a very exact way. I was feeling then totally secure in this relationship, in this therapeutic relationship. I had the sense that we almost walk I was walking in my toes, I mean, in a very silent moment. So I was able to symbolize, to say, this is happening. And then I felt immediately that I was, okay, I can go back into life again. And when later I asked what was this that we were doing, this is focusing, and this is my introduction. Then I participated a few focusing conferences, but not as a focusing trainee, mostly as a tourist, because there was this good quality in this conference, that these conferences were different than the usual ones. So slowly I I had my training in focusing, and this was another very, very important experience. I felt that this is how I want trainings to be done. I was fortunate to have with me Anna Karali, you know her, also Emmanuel Vandarakis, another coordinator from Greece. And then later, Judy Moore, Christiane Geiser. I am blessed. Yes, this is my short story.
And then, but your story continues in that you went on, I guess, like Judy, and became
Yes,
a trainer, a teacher of
yes,
focusing.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
With Judy, what happened was we didn't intend to collaborate. I mean, the collaboration happened.
It happened to you.
Yes, it happened. We don't know how, but it happened, and it was so natural.
Yeah. I'm glad
And
it happened.
yes, yes.
So maybe we should go on and talk a little bit about that collaboration. I'm curious. Well, one thing I'm curious about is what was the impulse, the motivation behind, because I mean, just the amount of work involved in these two volumes is, tremendous. And I'm wondering what was it for both of you that made it important enough to collaborate and engage in this project?
Judy, go on.
That's yeah. Okay. I mean, it did actually grow out of the conference in Loutraki in 2018. So, I mean, an immediate trigger was the fact that we had some good presentations there that were just going to get lost. And
Mhm.
so although we had them on the website, it's almost like we got the germ of a book there. And then it's really hard because I mean, it is almost like it did sort of happen very organically, almost by magic. I can't quite remember how we did it, but it just felt that there was a lot that needed to be said. There was a lot that we realized we wanted to say. There was a lot that we could see that other people wanted to say. So to put the volumes together was an opportunity. And then I remember Nikos wrote, do you remember that great long list of possibilities, different topics that I'm sure you must have received it, Greg, which just opened up all sorts of areas and people just responded. That was what was so great. I mean, we had such a good response. And the original plan was just to have one volume. And we had so many, we had, in the end, we had over 50 contributors. And so with so many people, the publisher agreed we could have the two volumes. Of course, the other very good thing was that we had the opportunity. I mean, Nikos knew the. Do you want to say something about the publisher,
Yes,
Nikos?
we had a lot total freedom. Do
Mm.
whatever you want. No, yes, total freedom, and also um, it was the COVID era. Then we had if we didn't have the COVID, then the sense of focus might not become true, become actualized. Yes.
Yeah. I think,
But
I
if
think,
if
yeah.
we do the same again, I think we wouldn't do it the same way.
Mm,
We have a lot to say. I mean, new things,
Mm.
not popular things, new things that we are enthusiastic about. But we, if we begin and we have this intention to have a third volume or a new book, a new volume. Uh, but we shall do it in a different way.
mm,
We have
Mhm.
specific, let's say, things we want to say.
yeah.
Yes.
And it has been sort of, what I realize is that the momentum to some degree, I mean, it had a natural momentum and it was certainly helped by the having the extra time during the pandemic. I mean, I'm not sure we would have done volume. I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember well enough. But because what I realize is that I've kind of lost a lot of time this last year because my husband's been so ill and various things have happened. So the momentum to carry on to the next phase has sort of ground to a halt for a while. And so it's now, I think we're at the point where we're saying, and especially after this summer where we've been to three very significant
Mhm.
gatherings that have been quite influential, I think we can say that we're raring to go again in
Mhm.
a different.
You're
Yeah.
enthusiastic again.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. We gathered together here in Greece in two conferences.
Uh-huh.
And yes, there is again this energy, this vitality. Let's say this. Let's do this.
Mhm.
Yes.
Can I ask, I think one of those conferences was a person-centered conference. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So this, yeah. Mm,
Yeah. I'd like to ask, um, I think this is maybe an interest or an issue for both of you, um, about sort of the interaction, the crossing, maybe even the slight conflict or whatever between the person-centered world and the focusing world. I don't come from the person-centered world, so I'm always curious to try to understand that a little bit more.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can say something about that. In fact, Nikos was, although obviously he was in Greece, he wasn't he wasn't at the person-centered conference. He was at the earlier conference that perhaps he can say something about in a bit. But the person-centered conference was, in a way, it was just a rerun for me of all the conferences that I've been to over the years, where there is this absolute split between um, classical person-centered people. And I mean, to be honest, there weren't even focusers there.
Mm.
In the early days, when I used to, like in the 1990s, the very first conference, I mean, I think it was 1989 was the last conference that Jensen himself went to. And then focusers did carry on through the 1990s. And I remember going to focusing sessions at the conferences, but I remember actually being, literally told that they were the enemy. They were not, they were not people that we should be, they were kind of like they were different somehow. I mean, it was nonsense. So at the conference in Athens just, a few weeks ago, there were a lot of EFT people, emotion focused therapists.
Yeah.
And they, of course, they use focusing, but they use focusing as part of a range of interventions. And it is a very different understanding of focusing. But I think that people within the person-centered world see this as being focusing, that it's something that is brought in and applied.
Okay.
And people have said to me, oh, we don't need we don't need the experiential element in the person-centered world because, it's dealt with by the EFT people. I mean, the significance of the experiential response, I feel, is so little understood in the person-centered world. The idea of the felt sense is so little understood, and it really depresses me. So, I mean, it depressed me anew when I was there this year. So that,
But yes, not only the focusing is so little understood, but let's say felt sensing is not considered as something important or valuable or let's say valid.
Mhm.
And not only Greenberg's EFT, but also the emotionally focused therapy of Johnson's, right? The other EFT uses focusing also, and also mentalization uses focusing as a technique. Mentalization is very, very interesting. Everything, every therapy model is very interesting, but they use focusing, um, yes, as a technique mostly. And they discover also the EFT therapists, etc. They discover the power, let's say, of focusing, that something is being done with focusing. So let's explore it more. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, in a way, it's like when I was teaching focusing back in the 1990s, I just knew it as a technique and I knew it was powerful, but I didn't understand why. I didn't connect it with a bigger picture of how therapy works. I think the sadness for me is the vital importance of the felt sense to how therapy works. And if we don't understand that, if people don't understand that, then I think that we have a much more superficial understanding of what therapy is. And as you know, I mean, Gendlin himself said the reason why he developed focusing oriented therapy was because people in the client-centered world just didn't get the significance of the experiential response.
So, can I ask again, just out of my ignorance, I'm trying to imagine what the difference you're describing would look like in practice. And is it that person-centered therapists would actually be guided by a kind of felt sensing without explicitly understanding that that's a part of their practice? Or does it remain more verbal? I'm trying to picture it.
I think that's a very interesting question because I think that they do. I think good person-centered therapists do use the felt sense, but without using the word, without acknowledging the word. But it's very, you see, I mean, I think what person-centered practitioners would talk in terms of is empathy.
Mhm.
And of course, there is the really, the very, very interesting thing that Gendlin writes about congruence. I mean, as early as the 1950s, he was writing about congruence as process and congruence in terms of experiencing. And I think I think it's that edge that is really not so well understood.
Interesting.
I think that let's take EFT. They use emotion. Okay, so they have a totally a huge list of different emotion categories like secondary, maladaptive, adaptive, etc. So they view the therapy in under this perspective, and it is okay. But when in focusing we say that we don't work with emotion, but we work, let's say, with something that it is more holistic, more broad, like the felt sense, then there is a conflict there, I think. And if let's say something more general, I think that let's say that we have a kind of felt sense revolution, as Akira calls it. But also, what is happening? It is the affect revolution. Affect and felt sense. Affect is so broad, so interesting that it is let's say there is an antagonism between felt sensing and affect theory, affect therapy, etc. There is a Greek word so broad, so deep, pathos, and in which somehow describes what affect is. And with pathos, we don't mean only passion, which is a good quality to have, a passion for life, passion even in therapy. So for me, there is this kind of antagonism, not only between, let's say, theory, the ontologies, theories, concepts, and then the felt meaning, the felt sense and affect. Okay, and pathos. There is this kind of antagonism. So in certain academic or therapeutic circles, the felt sensing doesn't have any recognized, let's say, value, doesn't say much to them.
Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, is it antagonism, or is it more an inability to understand each other's terms in some way?
I think that we need to translate things for them. If we to be understood better, then we need to learn different languages. Let's say we need to learn the Lesian language in order to translate some things to them.
Yes.
Because Deleuze also uses sense, the concept, the Deleuzean concept of senses, like felt sense. But Deleuze does not stay only into sense, let's say. He's interested also in abrupt changes, but Gentling is not interested generally in abrupt or violent or irrational or changes. In focusing, we talk about current forward, which is a kind of smooth, let's say, flow, a kind of continuity which is organismic. Yes, but in Deleuze we find also different kind of changes. They speak about bodies without organs, but if we read gently and comment on this, then this is not a pragmatistic. Gentle would say that there is an order. There is an order in life. Order here, there. Not only a cultural order or social order or but a kind of natural order. Yes, but if you have a theory that imagines no order, a body without strata, without organs, then this is something which is not pragmatistic. And I think that in focusing we have a pragmatistic, more or less, view, which I like, and the total freedom of expression also. Judy, we did hear from someone what happens with you focusers. You don't like theory. And something I respond something, but actually we like theory. We like the production, the wild production of theory, but in an experiential way. We will not, let's say that this is the truth or this is the most valuable. Even the experiencing, the term experiencing might change in one decade. I don't know. If you go back to ancient Greek, before the internalization of the soul, then the self was not the term, the self, the concept of the self, it was not of much importance, let's say. So even experiencing would have a different position into our lives.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Or
Well, let me say back to, and I think you're saying an awful lot, but let me say back to you just a tiny bit of what I'm getting in general from what you're saying. Um, and that is that, well, one of the things I think you're saying is that even if you bring in the term felt sense, you can't just bring in that term without it being reinterpreted through these other terms and other theories. If you're talking to someone from another school of therapy, they're going to translate felt sense into affect or emotion or sense,
yes,
or something they already know.
Yeah.
yes,
And
yes,
the problem with that is then you lose all of this other stuff that comes from the felt sense, like carrying forward, and there's some organismic order in the
yes,
body. And
yes.
this deeper kind of philosophy
Mhm.
that is implied in the term felt sense,
Yes,
but not implied because it's theoretically correct, implied because it's experientially or empirically found,
yes,
and
yes.
then an attempt to understand what is this that's happening, which is a different kind of philosophy you're saying, I think.
Uh, I like it a lot that we have so many philosophies.
Hmm.
And also, I don't consider that ancient philosophies like Aristotle's, let's say, is old. It's very new. It is very new for me.
Yeah.
Or yes. So so we need a kind of process of building bridges between different languages, let's say, because Gendlin is somehow monolinguistic. As I read Gendlin, he says only one thing all the time, except except the elaborations, let's say, focusing as a thought procedure, or thinking at the edge, or theory of personality change, when where he elaborates and we find more details.
Hmm.
But I find Gentlian qualities, let's say, in Judith Butler, in Masumi, in so many different language than Jenkins. So
Yeah.
yes, yes. So we need this kind of translating
Yeah.
terms and also bringing in a more, let's say, obvious way, the experiential element.
Yes. I
Yes.
want to give Judy a chance.
Much time. So Judy, maybe you need to comment on this.
Yes, I mean I'm just thinking, in a really, really simple example of that is how felt sense in the person-centered world would be automatically negatively regarded because it would be associated with focusing as a taught procedure. Um,
Okay.
and I suppose what I was going to say was I watched the your interview with Anne and Barbara last night, sort of partly in preparation to this, and I was really struck by how they have created their own system, through their own lived experience,
Mhm.
and how they have come up with how they have formulated something almost like from the ground up. And I think that is such an interesting process. And in a way, I think that's what I've witnessed with the person-centered approach, because I saw it being created out of client-centered therapy, with Brian Thorne and Dave Mearns, trying out different concepts, sort of slowly working, creating something almost in their own image or according to their own experience and understanding. And I think that there's something, you know, in as each person creates their own theory or their own set of practices, a lot of things are automatically excluded and things begin to close down. And I think our view of the person begins to close down as a result of that. And so what I see happening, and this was something that really struck me at the conference in Athens, was that the view of the person that I think is now being promoted is getting narrower and narrower. And I think we need new insights, new ways of looking at things to broaden things out again. And I think this does particularly relate to this, the spiritual dimension of the person, which people are so distant because again, the word spiritual just creates such negativity in some people that it just automatically gets crushed and people want to exclude it. So I think there's a big challenge in trying to find comprehensible terminology that can reach people without automatically alienating them.
Yeah, alienating them or automatically being subsumed within previous concepts they already know.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
like the word spirituality, somehow there needs to be another adjective, like Kevin you uses participatory or experiential or something spirituality so that it doesn't get, as you're saying, totally dismissed.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I wrote a chapter on spirituality and the person-centered approach, and I was under enormous pressure to kind of write it in more secular terms,
Mm,
and it was, or to write in terms that have been introduced into the person-centered approach that, and they're just terms that I think are, or they're concepts that I think, where did this come from? I mean, it's somebody's construction, it's somebody's invention, and I can't believe in any of that.
yeah.
So I think what we're looking to do is to uh, open things up in a different way, open up understandings in
Mhm.
a different way. I don't know. Would you agree with that, Nikos?
Yes, and somehow translating
Mhm.
things into different languages because I used to say in the past that gentleness language is not beautiful. I I don't agree. I like that gentleman says only one thing as I conceive it, as I take it. But in France, let's say, in French philosophy, they have so beautiful languages, philosophical languages. In Pelion, in this conference, I somehow presented in a very uh, dense way the Gentleness Project. So when I was talking about Gentlin's conception of time, someone very knowledgeable from the audience, a specialist in Bergson, said that, but this is Bergson.
Mhm.
I didn't answer explicitly, but this is not only Bergson, it is also Mead.
Mhm.
And okay, let's build a bridge between Bergson and Mead and Gentling, and of course any philosopher takes a lot, is inspired a lot from all the philosophy, all the
Yeah.
history of philosophy, but the outcome of it, what is the outcome of it? What is the sense of it after all? Uh, but yes, Bergson's let's say concept of duration is, if one reads this, is totally inspired. So we need these philosophical bridges, and also from Aristotle. Aristotle speaks about a sensus communis.
My concern, though,
Beyond also
yeah,
the alpha function.
when I hear this, I can see your enthusiasm and I share it. My only concern is when I've seen philosophies in conversation with each other it can become incredibly conceptual.
Yes, of course. And Gentling has predicted that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And Gentling says that I will not argue in a logical way with you.
yeah, yeah,
In this article, two phenomenologists do not disagree.
yeah, exactly.
There is a lot of the some paragraphs sounds to me like childish,
Yeah.
like Gentling saying like, okay, now with my way of saying philosophical things, you cannot actually disagree with me because if you disagree, you actually do what I have predicted and written about. So this is something childish. I mean it in a good way from Gentling, but and I believe in into this that if I disagree with you in a logical way, in a conceptual way, then I am into the danger to take your presuppositions, but I might not disagree. I might not agree with your presuppositions. So
Hmm.
I agree with Gentleman, and there is a risk when you talk or with another philosopher, with another person in only a conceptual level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. If you bring the experiential reference back in, then it can become a very interesting conversation where people start saying things that no philosopher has written down
Yes.
because they're
Yes.
referring to life as it is lived.
And this is the big freedom that the gentleman promises somehow,
Yeah.
that you don't have to follow anyone.
Yes, exactly.
And you can also stay away from concepts
Yeah.
somehow in your life when you are ill, when you are super happy, when you write something new, when you step forward, when you, yes.
Mhm. Can I just say, from my own experience in the existential world of psychotherapy, my concern is that there can be a lot of sort of heavy philosophizing that doesn't relate to experience. It's never brought back to experience. It's never informed by experience. It's informed by thinking is informing more thinking and thinking relating to thinking, and it just becomes incredibly conceptual.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, from both of you, we were talking a bit about the person-centered world. I'm wondering about other worlds of psychotherapy you've maybe been in contact with, like the existential psychotherapists or others, and wondering if you've seen any other kinds of misunderstandings of focusing or ways that focusing can be integrated into other schools.
Mm. I'm just wondering, Nikos, I mean, at Pelion, you were this was largely in Greek, Greg, so I didn't understand a huge amount of what was going on a lot of the time. But there was some quite interesting therapies being manifested there, and I'm just wondering how they were receiving what was being said about focusing.
Hmm.
Yes, we had the designs analysis. We had the Heideggerian ones, the Lesians
Hmm.
ones. Gestalt, yes, but Gestalt somehow it is very close to focusing. I think. Um, yes, mostly these modes of therapy: Gestalt, designs analysis, Heidegger, psychoanalysis, these these things. But your question, Greg, was how do we see?
Well, I guess if I rephrase it, wondering were people from those other orientations quite open to the experiential approach, or I mean, Gestalt has
Okay,
that, but
yes,
open to focusing?
yes, I think they were open if we were, if let's say Pavlos Zarayanis who can be open and totally accepting. Yes, then there is an opening. Yes, but if you have me, if I am provoked,
Yeah.
then I respond back in a similar way. Then maybe Rogers, let's say, core conditions, empathy, etc., they have been all over now. They are all over. Yes, in one way or another. The relationship, the value of the relationship, authenticity, etc., congruence. So I suppose or even I can see that felt sensing, or even the term, is already appropriated. It is more potent, powerful than emotion. And these appropriation are, some of them are bad or minimal, and some are good appropriations. I suppose that in a few years, in a few decades, felt sensing would be a kind of popular thing, or focusing would be incorporated almost everywhere. The experiential element in this kind of therapy, I see it happening. I mean, internal family systems now, they have moved forward with the incorporation of focusing, and bravo to them. I mean, yes, of course. And yes, I see this thing happening.
Yeah.
As I see it, focusing, or let's say focusing philosophy, or focusing philosophy about focusing view about therapy is is good enough. Enough. You need to add things, of course. How else? But it's good enough. And yes, the future, I think it would be like that. What happened to Rogers, something similar will happen. It is inevitable. Will happen to focusing.
I'm not so sure, I'm not so sure, because I think that, the subtlety of the felt sense, of the experiential response, is something that you have to really listen for. It's a real, it's a deep engagement with the other. And I think that there are so many different therapies around now, that people are more concerned with knowing a broad range of therapies rather than really listening in depth in a much simpler way. You see, and my own view is that the heart of the therapeutic response does come from that real close listening. So I'm afraid that all the different tribes, pluralism, whatever, I just think it's going in the opposite direction. That's my fear.
Sort of not towards experiential depth.
Yeah, exactly. Going towards more sort of superficial range rather than experiential depth.
I agree that we have a kind of heart there beating, the real felt sensing, let's say, the real listening. This is a heart, a therapeutic heart beating. Okay, but I think that there are other hearts, different kinds of hearts, and sources of energy or interaction between two people. Yes.
Can I
And
ask, can I just ask the opposite question in a sense? What kinds, maybe producing these two books, you came across this, but what kinds of complaints do other people have about the focusing world?
yes, one complaint is that what you say, you focusers, that it is more, actually is less.
Okay.
And what happened with acting out there in the world?
Okay. Interesting.
Yes, and we answered, Judy, that one needs to read was the article? Obedience, the obedience
Oh,
article.
there was a wonderful, wonderful obedience pattern, the Gendlin article, which so it's a very I when I began to go to focusing conferences, having only ever been for, over 10 years to person-centered conferences, I couldn't believe how friendly and welcoming they were by comparison. So there was something, and when we began to teach our students focusing, when Campbell first began, we even know, because we used to have the students on placement at our counselling service, and we noticed a change in the quality of the students, that they would somehow be more I don't know, more polite, not more polite, they'd be more kind of responsive and more thoughtful. So that was an extraordinary qualitative shift for me. So there is something I wish that, I really, really wish that all person-centered or any hostile therapy could experience a focusing atmosphere, because I think that's something very special.
That surprises me. Not that I haven't experienced that at focusing conferences, I have, but I had this fantasy that person-centered conferences would be very lovely and everyone would be very nice. Maybe not.
I think they're more factional actually than
Okay.
focusing conferences.
Okay.
I don't know,
And
how do you find existential conferences?
The existential world, I think, has a combination sometimes of kind of a humility and openness, which I appreciate, and a slight quirkiness. It's sort of a collection of people that don't belong anywhere else,
Okay.
but can also have a slightly aggressive uh, conceptualizing aspect to it at times. Oh, there's a couple of other questions I would like to ask. They're general, so I'm happy for you to take them in any direction you want to. Um, One of them is something about within the focusing world itself, like especially the world of focusing oriented therapy. Are there sort of aspects of the way FOT is developing or being discussed that you find interesting or problematic or would like to see developed in a different way? Or just wondering kind of about your experiences of the FOT world.
after the death of Gentling, then we saw a lot of new books, a lot of publications. And this is good. I mean, a lot of new things, new combination of things. I think I saw something focusing on psychedelics and therapy with psychedelics, and focusing on sexuality, focusing on sex. This is good. This is good. And also the crossing between FOT and other kinds of therapy. This is a kind of natality, a kind of creativity, and it is so good and rich also. I think that we need to develop more based on what Gentling had created already. We need, for example, what Akira would like to develop, this experiencing model. This is a good project. I would like to participate. I would like to develop my own, let's say, mini project model, sorry, out of what Gentling has written, has left us. Yes, yes, I am positive. I see only good things happening in the future in FOT. Yes. And I don't like the term FOT, focusing therapy. I like more. Yes.
Okay.
And I cannot, as I think I've said to you, Greg, I cannot call myself a focusing oriented therapist. And I cannot use the term felt sensing either. So I mean, my person-centered roots are strong, but the thing that I would wish is that focusing oriented therapy would honor more its roots, not in, I mean, I think Gendlin is very well honored in the focusing oriented therapy world, but I think the origins and the early work with Rogers and his team, I mean, it did grow out of that, and I think that's really important to acknowledge, that it didn't just come out of nowhere.
Yes, yes.
And
And in Greece, we can see focusing only based upon the person-centered, let's say, values. We cannot think of focusing in a different way. But Judy, we are going to create something about this. we have started creating a seminar, me and Judy, 2 years before. Yes, and we critique everything. We critique PCA, PCE. We critique focusing. We collect from whatever kind of different therapy, and we critique, but in a positive way, in a goodwill, FOT, person-centeredness. And Judy is so minimal. Judy, I cannot distinguish one term that it is a core term for you, only the good listening or the experiential response, maybe. But then you have just that, and this is enough.
yeah. That's all I've got. That's all.
Yes. And this is so good. Yeah, this is all we have.
Yeah.
And this and this and this, the relationship.
Can I pick up on that a bit? Because that was the other thing I wanted to ask about, is just kind of new developments, or where both of you are kind of carrying this work further.
Judy, first, go first.
Well, I think what I'm inspired by at the moment is this project, working towards putting the seminar together, working towards a new publication. I think that's really important. Since I began to train as a therapist, which was quite a while ago, I'm so aware of how any therapy is a reflection of its creators and the influences on those creators. And so I suppose I see the sort of like the human beings at the heart of every therapy that we follow. And I suppose what I really want to do is to open up understanding, including my own understanding. I mean, primarily in a way that to see that there are real general human truths in all of this. And I'm more and more interested in sort of what is universal, what is collective, what links us to the rest of the universe. It's sort of and the wise thinking from the past. I think there are so many sort of wise influences that we could open ourselves up to, rather than the narrowness of, this is so and so's theory, this is so and so's theory. And I think that's my kind of, it's a wish to expand. It's a wish to expand my own understanding and to help others expand their understanding as well.
Yeah.
So for me, yes, of course, we need to actualize to our seminar. Maybe we can start with Tiffy. And we need to write a new book, but not in a collective way. We need to say what we want to say and then invite a few persons, but for very specific reasons. What I am going to write this year is this affect and felt sense and pathos, this thing. and maybe translate a lot of things that I have written in Greek. Maybe some people will find them interest if they can read it in English. I feel blessed that I am with Judy. Somehow, yes, this is the important thing. And not only Judy, of course, Pavlos, Anna, you know them, and Christiane. So there is this spark of vitality and creativity. And yes, there are a lot of things to be carried forward, to be created. Yes. And somehow I need to thank you a lot because your face, your says a lot to me. You are so you are listening so seriously. I don't know if this word sounds good in English. In such a seriousness, which is very good for me. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I want to just say back, it feels to me when I hear both of you talking about what's coming up in the future, it feels like you're kind of interested in expanding the edge of what is currently considered to be the focusing world or focusing oriented therapy, and
Yes.
partly through critique, which
Mhm.
I think by the word critique, you mean kind of deep exploration, not just taking a term like felt sense or carrying forward or interaction first, all these terms, but taking them and looking more deeply at what do we actually mean by that? What is that term? And what is the validity of that in therapy or in focusing practice? Maybe what other traditions have said about it already, that sort of thing. Is that a fair reflection?
Yes.
Yeah,
What are the differences that matter? Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, I think it is carrying forward some of the thinking that we introduced in senses of focusing. I mean, I think that was I think we've got a good grounding there in a way that
Yes.
you
Yes.
know,
Yes.
possibilities come from.
Thank you, Judy. Because I wrote about epoche, Husserlian epoche in sense of focusing, and this is so rich. I mean, if you read gently and commenting in Thomas Fuchs, if you read this article, then you have the impression that the Husserlian language cannot express the dynamic nature of, let's say, the phenomenon of body. Okay, we know that. Yes, gentlemen, yes, of course. But if we take this into physics, we have, let's say, relativity or quantum physics, but we have the Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics is all over around us, is useful, is good. Also good is the quantum mechanics. So I like Thomas Fuchs and what he does, and I like Zahavi, because if you read Zahavi, then you can know better what phenomenology actually is and what is not. And we are going, hopefully, to have them in a conference, Fuchs, in Greece in 2026. Hopefully, it's not sure. And this is a collaboration between the science analysis, Gestalt, focusing, the Hellenic Focusing Center, and existential psychotherapy. So four different kinds of therapies will collaborate to have a conference like that. So this is something important, I think.
And I think that the challenge, of course, is how to then communicate new understandings in comprehensible ways.
Mhm. Yes. And when I hear that, my plea is not to have conferences too much where people read at each other,
Yes.
um, but to have conferences where if someone, for example, is talking about their form of phenomenology, that it's a practice. Because if everyone has the practice, then they can understand it their own way. They're not stuck understanding it someone else's way.
You said it perfectly. Yes. And not talking to each other just, but maybe a real symposium, we said at Billion, a real
Oh,
symposium.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
wine, music, and then this kind of loving quality. We love our subject, we love ourselves, and we go on.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
very exciting. It's
yeah,
very exciting if people are conceptualizing in a generative way from what they're actually experiencing. And then somebody else adds in something else, and you can take that in and see if that resonates. And then it feels exciting because it feels very alive.
Yeah. And that, of course, involves listening.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Okay. Thank you both very much. I found it really, really rich. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. And I hope that you are gently disruptive everywhere you go.
And I hope that we can meet together in person.
That would be
Okay.
lovely. Yeah,
Yeah, please
Absolutely.
come to this. Or
I'd love that. Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So
Thank you
Thank
both very,
you.
very
Thank you
much.
very much. Thank you.
thank you
Thanks
very
a
much.
lot. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye for
Bye.
now.